Hi everyone, this is Sarfraz from Aristotle Prep, and we are looking at passage 4 from the OG 13 RC chapter. These are questions 11 to 13 that we are looking at. As always, I will first read the passage and I will try to understand it in great detail the way I normally do. So I'll focus on things that I would have understood had I been doing this passage myself. The first sentence, as always, is very important. It says, Io and Europa, the inner two of Jupiter's four largest moons, are about the size of Earth's moon and are composed mostly or entirely of rock and metal. So the first sentence basically tells me that the whole passage will have something to do with the moons of Jupiter, and it talks about two of them, Io and Europa, and I know that there are four moons in total. Thus, these four moons are somewhat analogous to the planets of the solar system, in which the rock and metal-rich inner planets are distinct from the much larger gas and ice-rich outer planets. So from this second sentence, I have gathered that there is a difference between the moons. Same way there is a difference between some planets in the composition, basically. That's what I have understood. Some of them are rock and metal rich, some are gas and ice rich. Okay. Jupiter's moons are, however, more systematic. More systematic compared to what? Compared to the planets. Many of their properties vary continuously with distance from Jupiter. For example, Io is ice-free, Europa has a surface shell of ice, and while Ganymede and Callisto are both ice-rich, outermost Callisto has more. So basically, from inside there was no ice to the last one outside, which has a lot of ice covering basically. So it's systematic. That's all I've gathered. So basically, the first paragraph is just talking about the moons of Europa. Initially, I thought it would only talk about two of them, but it actually speaks about all four of them. And it says that there are some similarities between these moons and the planets of our solar system, but there is also a difference, which is that the moons are a lot more systematic. That's it. Second paragraph says this compositional gradient has geological parallels. Okay, so now it's focusing on the gradient basically means gradual increase. So if you focus on the last sentence of the previous paragraph, I remember that the ice basically increases gradually as one moves from the inner moon to the outer moon, and this compositional gradient has geological parallels. So what parallels I will see now. Io is extremely geologically active. Okay, so just the first sentence actually has put some thoughts in my head. So if it's trying to make a parallel, so how will it make things parallel? There is basically a gradient, which means things are either increasing or decreasing. So now Io, I remember, is the innermost moon. Io is absolutely ice-free, and it says Io is geologically very active, which means as I go outside towards Callisto, that geological activity will actually go down. That's the thought. You see, I just read that one small sentence, and this thought came to my head. I could be totally wrong, as I will realize once I read ahead, but this just helps me again focus on the passage. So Io is extremely geologically active. Europa seems to be active on a more modest scale, and Ganymede has undergone bouts of activity in its geological past. Only Callisto reveals no geological activity. So my prediction was absolutely perfect. In similar fashion, Callisto's surface is very heavily cratered from the impact of comets and asteroids. So now it's starting from Callisto, and it says Callisto has a lot of craters. So I'm assuming as we come towards Io, the number of craters will go down. So Ganymede, like Earth's moon, is heavily cratered in parts. Europa is very lightly cratered, and no craters have been detected on Io, even though Jupiter's gravity attracts comets and asteroids passing near it, substantially increasing the bombardment rate of the inner moons compared to that of the outer moons. So this is interesting. Even though the bombardment rate is very high for inner moons, still there are no craters on Io. Since we have only one sentence left, I'm not sure if the passage will explain why that is, but that's a thought that did come to my head. The last sentence says, but because of Io's high degree of geological activity, its surface undergoes more or less continuous volcanic resurfacing. So it actually did explain. It actually did explain why there are no craters on Io, despite it being bombarded with comets and what have you. So the second paragraph, if I have to summarize, is basically again telling you that the systematic point mentioned in the first paragraph, that the moons of Jupiter are very systematically arranged, that follows into the second paragraph when it talks about one, geological activity, and second, the number of craters. And in the end, it gives you an explanation for why there are no craters on Io. So, if I have to summarize the entire passage, it talks about the four moons of Europa, and it talks about the systemic nature in which they are arranged, with reference to the presence of ice, geological activity, and the number of craters. That's the entire passage for me. It's an absolutely neutral passage. There is nothing being praised or criticized. It's a flat, neutral, descriptive passage. Now, when I read it the way I read it, you might think it's a very slow process. But keep in mind, as I have already spoken about in the introductory video, if you haven't seen that, please go and watch that. When I explain it like this, it goes very slow. But when I'm actually reading it, it is much, much, much faster. So, the reason I go this slow is because I want to explain to you the things that I would have focused on. Now, the focusing wouldn't be that I will stop over there and I'll give it some thought. It happens instantly as I read. But that's the way to read. That's the way to understand, to absorb. And once I read it like this, you'll see it goes, the questions go very fast. I don't have to spend too much time on each question. I'll know the answers to a lot of questions just by reading the question itself, without maybe even having to go back to the passage. So having understood the passage like that, we will now look at the questions, starting with question number 11. According to the passage, which means it's a detailed question. So according to the passage, the difference in the amount of cratering on Callisto's and Io's respective surfaces can probably be explained by the difference between these two moons with respect to which of the following factors. Now again, I will try to predict the answer. I'm not looking at the options. And see, the passage I clearly remember tells me that Callisto has a lot of craters and Io does not have craters. And what's the reason for that? Io is actually getting bombarded big time with comets, yet it does not have craters because it has a lot of geological activity, which Callisto does not have. So the answer has to be the level of geological activity wherever it is in the options. That is basically your answer. So size is out, ice content is absolutely not going to help. The rate of bombardment by comets is also not helping you at all. The influence of Jupiter's other moons does not help. The answer is absolutely E, the level of geological activity. So you see, when you understand the passage the way I do, it becomes very easy to get to the answer. Anyway, these are easy questions.